We've got two context poems on the syllabus this week. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Frost at Midnight and Alfred Lord Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade. The Tennyson poem is included in your activities on Memorializing. I'm going to work through the Coleridge poem with you, both to prepare you for that on your own activity, and so that we can get our Tuesday night conversation going with a little more background already established. Some things to note about this poem. It is a romantic poem from 1798, so about 100 years before modernism. The Romantic era was similar to the modern era in a lot of ways, in that there was a great deal of social and political upheaval, and the writers of the day felt that the style of the past was insufficient to capture the complexity of their day. Like the moderns, they were big manifesto writers. They didn't host the First World War, but the American and French revolutions were important shaping events. In the last video like this that I made for you, I carefully worked through the poem, focusing on individual words and even punctuation marks. That's a good way to read a poem, but today I want to do a more holistic reading of this poem, partly because it's long and I want this video to come in under 10 minutes, and partly because Yeats takes up the thematics of this poem more than the style or technique. I encourage all of you to follow the practices of the earlier video, though. Read the poem out loud. Think about how it's put together, because it's one of the most beautiful and often read poems in English. English professors often have the poem incorporated into ceremonies marking the birth or adoption of their children, for instance. This poem is written in blank verse, unrhymed lines of iambic pentameter, which was Shakespeare's meter. It has 4 verse paragraphs, not really stanzas. This form is very unconstraining. It allows you to say whatever you have a mind to say. In the first verse paragraph, the poet sets a scene. He is sitting up late at night, after not only all the people in his house, but also all the people of the village have gone to bed. Don't be worried about the word inmates. That just means people who live inside with me. Only later was this word hijacked to mean people who are in prison or mental hospital. It's really quiet, and it's a cold weather night, a night when frost happens. Rural people often think of frost in negative terms because it kills growing things. But in this poem, we hear right off the bat that the frost is performing a secret ministry. That is, a quiet service to the world. There's a baby owl, which is probably out of place if it's cold enough for frost. Owlets, like other baby birds, should really be born in warm weather in order to survive. The poet is alone, except for his little baby, who is sleeping in a cradle next to him. It's so quiet outside and in the cottage that he can let his mind wander. Seeing a little film of ash on the fireplace grate reminds him of the folk tradition that calls those films strangers, and holds them to be harbingers of a visit. Now we're in the second stanza. The sight of the stranger takes him back to childhood when he used to see a stranger on another grate. He remembers being at school and dreaming of his childhood home in the village, with the church bells and the seasonal fair. He fell asleep to those dreams, and daydreamed it as well while sitting under the watchful eye of his teacher, the stern preceptor, all the while hoping against hope to have a visitor from the village, and particularly wishing his sister might visit him. Some things to know. Coleridge's father died when he was 8, and he was sent to school in London and rarely allowed to return home. And school in those days was mostly memorizing things and repeating them word for word to the teacher, who could beat you pretty mercilessly if you couldn't remember the lesson, or if you fidgeted in your seat, or if he was just having a bad day. So this mode of living was probably not to Coleridge's taste, and wouldn't be to yours or mine either, I expect. In the third stanza, we see what he does with this reverie. He begins to address the baby directly. and it becomes a poem about the father's wishes for his little child. Looking at the baby makes him happy, and it fills him with hope. When he looks at the baby, having just thought about his own childhood, what he does is promise the baby that the baby will not suffer as he has suffered. For I was reared in the great city, pent mid cloisters dim, and saw naught lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds which image in their bulk both lakes and shores and mountain crags. As he looks at his child and thinks of his own miserable childhood, he has hope and faith that his child's life will be better than his, and he makes an implicit vow to the child that it will be so. His child will never have to ask for anything from God. God will give the baby such an overabundance of beautiful things that the only things the baby will ever ask for are the requests of a full and contented heart. And now, in the fourth stanza, the poet leaves the elevated tone of that third verse paragraph and returns to the quiet peace of the beginning. Because the baby's life is going to be so blessed, all seasons shall be sweet to thee. And he will not mind the changes of the seasons, the coming of the cold, and the secret ministry of frost. I really love this poem. In class on Tuesday, I'm going to want to think about how it compares to Yeats's A Prayer for My Daughter, also a poem about a father dreaming a future for his baby. I think it's a very common experience for loving parents to look at their new child and to think to themselves about their own childhood, and to resolve to do what they can to make their child's life better than theirs was. We'll want to think about the differences between these two versions of that experience, and to ask why Yeats takes the particular take he does, what he alters, and why. The answer, of course, will have something to do with modernity, and modernity will also have something to do with differences between the Victorian poem you're going to compare to Yeats in the memorializing exercise later this week.